Hello everybody. I'm not going to jump around like the mayor did, so I'm going to sit if you don't mind. It's better for me. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Pablo. Very nice to see you and to see some other people I know very well and people that I know also followed some of the work that we are doing in the Afrikaner district or in other places in the world. So I also rely on all of you that know the projects very well to be critical, scrutinize, to give extra information. If I am lacking to give the right information at some point, please do so. So I'm going to talk about what I think is needed to build resilient networks of people and their skills and how you do that over time. And also how you sort of like try to make that into a durational approach and what that is. And I will talk about the Afrikanerwijk particularly and the transition from Freehouse as a project and its interventions toward the neighborhood cooperative we are having there. And I will talk also a little bit about, in general, about what I think might be needed for building those resilient networks and skills. So, and also what that means for a practice as in this case, I am an artist. I think that's important. So what I've been asking myself over the last 25 years over and over again is how can I intervene in a way that people can increase the numbers and intensity of their ties? How can I work with my skills as an artist within the complexities of our cities and put myself to work in areas that are undergoing rapid change and are under huge pressures from the forces of globalization? Trying to assist processes that make these tensions visible and encourage people to become participants in the process of visualizing the dynamics, complexity and diversities of the cities we live in. So this is sort of like general quote I always start with because then I get the hang of it, let's say. For me, I think that's sort of important. What does that mean to intervene in a way that people can sort of increase the complexity and intensity of their ties? But also how can you involve people in these processes of visualizing the dynamics, complexity and diversity of the cities we live in? And I think it's a little bit more complicated than just the transformation of a city into some key concepts such as creativity, sustainability and some other buzzwords. And I think we all have somewhere a dream about how we want to live together, but I'm not always sure if it's the same dream. So, I just was cutting and pasting some stuff as I always do because I thought like I wanted to use a quote of David Harvey when he talks about rebel cities, where he talks about this having a dream for a city, as I find it very important. He argues in that book that the freedom to make and remake ourselves and our cities is one of the most precious yet most neglected of our human rights. The city we want cannot be divorced from what kind of people we want to be, what kind of social relationships we want to have, what kind of relationship to nature we want to cherish, what style of life we want, what aesthetics we hold. The right to the city is therefore far more than a right of an individual or group access to the resources of the city. It is a right to change and reinvent the city more after our heart's desire. And I like always that. It's reinventing the city more after our heart's desire. But, he says, this is a collective rather than an individual right, since reinventing the city inevitably depends as an exercise of a collective power over the processes of urbanization. And I think that's very important, the collective power over the process of urbanization. So then how to organize that power and how to figure out what is actually our collective desire for our cities based on all our individual dreams for that same city. So that's where I wanted to start, and then I take you through some of my notes and some of the things we've been doing. So the current economic crisis, as well as the shifting of geopolitical boundaries and social-cultural demographics as a result of urbanization, has generated numerous local zones of conflict. Many neighborhoods have become sites of contestation to which different conditions of power are inscribed. More and more people feel left out from the way that their daily environment is shaped, formed, governed, and financed. They are increasingly becoming disinvested and excluded, which leads to a serious disconnection between ordinary people and their government. Angela McKay, one of the members of the Land Trust in Enfield, described this disconnect as follows. The local community has had their hopes repeatedly raised and then dashed by the promises of neighborhood regeneration or city revitalization, which has been slow to materialize. After 15 years of living under these conditions, and this is some of the conditions, that of destruction, boarding up houses and displacement, many people have lost trust in any government scheme. It is the number of times we have been made promises and have been lied to. We are sick of the waiting for something to come. And she, very much in the way she describes this state of disconnection a lot of people feel as a pathological state, or as a state of a living dead, which I think is very important to take into consideration. The development of, ooh, it's better. It's absolutely better for you, but not better for me. We already have a conflict of desire here. Oh. No, I think you can put it out. I think I manage. Yeah. I pretty much know this one by heart. So the development of the city, however, has to be a collective process. It has to be a collective process. In this regard, and despite the growth of disconnection, everywhere you see micro-urbanisms emerging within small communities across the city in the form of non-conforming spatial and entrepreneurial practices, which are defining a different idea of density and land use. And I believe that from these practices, new economical, political, and social forms can emerge. The question is, how can we detect those forms, how can we foster those forms, and how can we challenge those forms into connection? So the question to me is, how can we collectively understand better the different conditions of powers inscribed in our neighborhoods, so that we can actually become a shaping force in our environment, and that we can set forth a counter form of urban economic development that thrives on social encounter, collaboration, and exchange. And I say it like that before I take you to my hometown, Rotterdam, or more precisely, as we say, to the Rotterdam South, or we call it our global South, to talk a little bit in three parts about the situation that was there at hand, the urban situation, that of marginalization of a community, the interventions and action we have been undertaking in search for an organizational form, and the difficult to create a radical form of self-organization, which comes with that. So I will talk from Freehouse to neighborhood cooperative and what it actually took or still takes on a daily basis to take matters into our own hands. And I will give you some overview about Rotterdam and Rotterdam South, but I do that also to explain a little bit these complexities and these urban stratas, I call it the emotional and economical and social conditions that are latent in an area, and how it is that people feel overwhelmed by them, that they feel unable to act upon them or be active at it. So since 2008, Freehouse has been working in the Afrikanenwijk, a neighborhood socially and economically marginalized in the south of Rotterdam. The first in the Netherlands to have a majority of its residents with a migratory background, and with that its interracial conflicts. It is approximately 10,000 residents consists primarily of Turkish, Moroccan, Suriname and Antillian, many of whom migrated in large number in the 70s to work at the dockyard. In 2008, after the economic crisis, most of the second and third generation immigrants struggled with low education levels and the disappearance of working class jobs in the harbor and in the area. Sounds familiar maybe to what the mayor has been talking. The name Afrikanerwijk, and with that the names of the streets such as Paul Kruger and Pretoria Laan are a daily reminder of a colonial past, of exclusion and systematic inequality. And with the expansion of the city, city centre, or the creative city program of the local government, the local government strategic plan for the area for 2040, designed in 1996, and its planned gentrification would add another layer of displacement to the area. And I will explain this a little bit. I will also show a little bit of the facts. What is also very interesting, that some of the things I will tell you, if you see there's approximately, we say 10,000 people, but you see in 2014 this number is declining, and this predominantly also already has to do with a lot of measurements that has been put into place to actually move the city center towards the south. Now, some of the figures for you to see, and some of the developments that are happening in and around the Afrikaner district. And as I said, in 1996 there was a plan made for the creative city, talking about creativity and the expansion of the city center towards the south. And this was done by a series of programs. One was called the Kop van Zuid, Katendrecht, Parkstad. And as you see, the Afrikanerwijk, but also the Afrikaner, which has the Afrikaner market, is actually exactly in the triangle where all these developments are hitting the south. Something I also always say in this map, and I am not making a joke when I tell about these things, is that last week, Friday, there was the City Makers Conference in Rotterdam, which is a conference organized by, and I know this is all recorded, which is organized by the local government to talk about the state of Rotterdam and the state of the future of Rotterdam development. And they were showing maps, and I should have scanned one of the maps to show, they were showing maps of the future of Rotterdam and its new economic developments, and all the spearheaded points they were placing, they were all there. The whole south of Rotterdam, which actually goes till here, was not on the map, it was white. All the other things had colors and were marked and were having things, and it was a blank area. And it had sort of like a vague thing of saying like still to be, discovered is not the world, but still to be imagined or still to be thought of, or looking at possibilities of greening and city and stuff like that. People who know South think that is a really weird, still up to date, a really weird way to portray the city as such. So I think it's very important. So Freehouse started in 2008 testing strategy of radicalizing local production in the area in order for the Afrikaner district to survive the expansion of the creative city from the city center towards the south. Freehouse started also to action research that what I call the invisible design that was pre-rolled in the area to prepare the ground for the arrival through legislation and policy alteration. Planned from above in specialist workshops and prepared way in ahead. Those laws and policies were both on a national, local as well as a European level. And why do I say that? Because I always show these images that one of the things that when we were there we start wondering why places look the way they look. And that's a very simple question. Why does some of the complexity, but also some of the richness of the interaction or the cultural richness of exchange or the cultural richness of various forms of productions that you feel that are there or that you sometimes encounter that are there, why are they not visible on a day-to-day basis and predominantly not visible as part of public life or of the public domain? And I think a lot has to do, like for instance with these policies of developing cities, quite often a whole array of legislations and policies are pre-rolled in order to prepare the ground for its arrival of this new idea of what the space should look like. And this pre-rolling of what I call invisible design is something I think we should, as designers, be much more aware of, how we can challenge those invisible designs. Instead of trying to make something nice that goes with that, is to really fundamentally question the premises of who designs space and who has to ride over those processes. I think for me that's very important. So the Afrikanenwijk is disproportionately repressed in a permanent legal state of repression. Rotterdam is a national leader in policing its inhabitants, and the Afrikanenwijk is one of its main focus areas. Since 2001, efforts have steadily increased. Hundreds of surveillance cameras now tape the city non-stop, including the Afrikanenwijk. First, the Municipal Neighborhood Security Index was established, officially pointing the Afrikanenwijk as a problem area. It became one of the so-called neighborhood security areas, where special security measurements are allowed, such as preventive body searching, so the stop and search policy, as we say it. And this is a kind of thing. First, an Afrikanenwijk is put on a list. It says like it was one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the Netherlands, among one of those. And then a lot of extra measurements start being put in effect, which have a quite restrictive way. So that was one of the first thing that started to happen. A quite strong surveilling and policing of the population, but also of the activities in the area. Second law and policy that was made is a I think very drastic one. It's called the Special Measurement Law on Metropolitan Problem Areas. And this came into effect in 2006, and it was drafted explicitly on the request of Rotterdam in order to prevent unprivileged non-Western minorities from moving into designated problem areas. It's a law, a national law, but it's famously known as the Rotterdam Law. And basically what it does is that people that are living in the Afrikaner district, which you saw is predominantly social housing, that at this moment in time, when an area is put under the Rotterdam Law, you can't move in there if you don't have double minimum wage. So if you live there, you can stay, but if you want to move in there, then you have to have a certain income. Or it's a way to diversify an area towards income. And it's also one of the reasons why you see the numbers of housing, of inhabitants declining. So it's an active form of basically people segregation and people management, if you want. So this infamous Rotterdam law allows municipality to deny housing permits to newcomers in fragile neighborhoods based on an income requirement or a previous unwanted or criminal behavior. So that's the second one. The law has only been implemented in 5 neighborhoods nationally, all in the Rotterdam South. The Afrikanenwijk is of course one of them. And although the effect of the Rotterdam law on neighborhoods has not been properly researched, an amendment is currently drafted in Parliament, and it actually went through, unfortunately, that will expand the current maximum application of this law from 8 to 20 years. Just talk about the design instrument that is used. So this actually puts the Afrikaner wijk for another 12 years in a sort of permanent state of exception, as you can say, which is really problematic. And then, of course, all of this came into being with a municipality ambition to be at the frontier of enforcement in the Netherlands, and with an amplified idea of a slogan that said Rotterdam perseveres. It has to be clean, whole, and safe. With a rhetoric of together we are strong, this kind of thing. So, just to give you an idea about design. This is all already there. That's all already in that picture. So what to add to that, or what to do with that? Because behind closed doors, the area is vibrant with culture products and activities, but many of these culture products or activities couldn't be sold, displayed, or take place in public space due to the restrictive regulation and onerous permitting rules imposed by the local government. So what did Freehouse do? Freehouse worked twofold. First, it focused its efforts around the highly regulated Afrikaner market, in which it actively challenged such restrictions in over 300 interventions. We call them sometimes act of civil disobedience or act of acupuncture. These are small acts where you feel that things are stuck and flows are stuck or forms of circulation are stuck. You sort of pinch upon it and then hope that new energy start flowing again, but also start working towards a more holistic system. I think it's also important. We call them performative actions to mobilize the existing local, physical and social culture capital. And here the performative should be understood as a way to try to decolonize space, as a performative gesture or intervention that tries to create a space for the confrontation of a diversity of individual projections versus the projection of the perfect life or the dream by local government, who are each time trying to abstract space. And I think this is also very important to say that quite often a lot of these policies and designs that are done by the city are actually policies that abstract space. So I think it's maybe also our task as designers to de-abstract space for other people to be able to actually find a way to get engaged. You know? Because these big abstract processes. So for me the performative can work like that. So we did a lot of those interventions. I'm not going to speak about all 300. Some people know a few of them or already heard me talking about 300 of them. But they ranged from very simple things, from trying to create an orange juice and sell little bottles of smoothies in a fruit and vegetables stall, organizing meals together, organize all kind of like activities and demonstrations on the market of local skills and local qualities. I always say all the images I'm showing here are images that under the current both legal and policy requirement are not permitted. And then you think like, you know, what would be the reason? But it took us really a few years to unravel all this underlying and conflicting legislation. And this has to do with the fact, for instance, with this idea that things should be orderly, is that, for instance, the government has a one permit, one stall policy, because that means that things look neat, you know, if there is only one thing. But that together with a system of branching that is very nearly defined means that if you have a permit for selling fruit and vegetables and you have a permit for working with fruit and vegetables, then you can only operate one permit. So while juicing fruit belongs to the permit working with fruit and vegetables, and selling oranges means having a permit for selling fruit and vegetables, you can't operate two. So think about an area where you say that diversity is maybe one of the forces of the area. You come up with a clear-cut system of legislation that's actually exactly siloing everything separate. So there's no cross branching possible or cross-relating. So like I said, I'm not going to explain you all 300s. We also had a lot of fun with it because they were performative. Some of them were also very light. Don't take it all that heavy. But they were all there to try to understand that invisible design. And I think one of the biggest one in the area that was also there, that during market days the area was put under another law, it's so-called local general ordinance, Algemene Plaatselijke Verordening, that allows municipality in problem areas to proclaim a ban on public assembly. And I always think like this one is almost surrealistic, is that you have one of the biggest markets in the Netherlands there on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and then the areas under the ban on public assembly. This sort of like in my head that I find very interesting. This ban on public assembly actually originated from the UEFA 2000 European Football Championship held in Rotterdam, and it was first used as an anti-riot law, but in the Afrikaner market it's actually in effect, and that's how it's predominantly used at the moment, as a instead of legitimizing anti-hooliganism, it's now used to enforce anti-terrorist concerns, which is a big thing. So you put a whole area under such a law, because on the market day 15,000 people are visiting this market from all parts of life and from all walks of life. And like I said, we also do lighter interventions and performances where we also play with a lot of the information that we have. This is, for instance, a parade of people walking on the market with somebody walking in front, and that says, so keep moving, don't stop. Because what is actually one of the essence of the ban on assembly is that you cannot assemble with 3 or more and stop on a certain place. So, but what if you walk with 3 or more? Is that assembly? You know, the law is not very specific on that. So it's a playful way of doing it. But what we also always keep doing is organize a large exhibition in the Gemaal, where we are about trying to show and give insight to people into this complexity of the situation at hand. So the interventions ranged from, like I said, from styling of stalls, forms of presentation, introducing new products and services, new spatial arrangement of the market, negotiating and altering legislation, and using the market as a political space by public speaking about it. Freehouse over the years engaged itself both with the subversion of existing systems of public policy and governmental regulation agency, as it proposed clear and specified improvements to policy. Second, and that's also I think one of the more important parts of it, we went door to door to the neighborhood to search and identify the unrecognizable skills and capabilities of the inhabitants, the curry makers, the knitters, the builders, the painters and the spoken word artists. And we started to facilitate opportunities to both sell and showcase talents on the market, taking over empty stalls. What we did also is to accommodate collective production. We opened a series of collaborative workplaces in empty shops that still are run today. A neighborhood store, a fashion atelier, a collective kitchen. And those collaborative workplaces created the conditions for collaborative productions, allowed individual makers to pool their resources and legitimize their informal businesses. For instance, providing under the umbrella of the collective the necessary papers or permits, very important. And from this working together and from this collaborative production, new forms of neighborhood organization that had the capacity to benefit from and reinvest in the local economy were catalyzed. So I think what Freehouse has been doing over the last years is trying to renegotiate the different urgencies in the area and to find ways to create urban unions so that different forms of livelihood could come into being. And new forms of commonality came into being through setting up change of collective production. And this, for instance, is one of these change of production of a product, for instance, the neighborhood kitchen makes, and how you see that the products we make actually densify the relationships in an area, which I think is very important. And this is, for instance, a network diagram of the kitchen about how they share knowledge and expertise in the area. So it's the Afrikaner Wijk and how the relational networks of skill sharing looks like this. So I think that these new forms of commonality came into building through setting up collective production. A process of social, economical and cultural activities that moved on various scales and that made a different informal practice of the everyday emergent, while at the same time rerouting them in stronger networks. And this is what we call, or like to call, radicalizing the local. So it's actually making things more emergent while at the same time rerouting them. So not making them emergent to just make them visible and make them promotional, but at the same time, in that exercise, trying to also reroute and create new networks. So, you have to give me 10 minutes more, because I'm slow today. So, and I think this for us is very important, and working on knitting stronger networks into urban unions. And I like to call the word urban unions because a lot of people talk about unions and work unions, but these are thematic unions. And I think for me it's very interesting to think about urban unions, unions on the scale of a neighborhood. So is there a way we can unify some of our urgencies and emergencies on a local level? So the knitting of these stronger networks into urban unions and its cultural capabilities necessitated into a new organizational form as well as a new economical form on the scale of a neighborhood rather than that of an interest group. And for us that's been very important. For the period of a year in an empty formal cultural building, a test trajectory of such an organization was run. And we call that the Wijkwarenhuis, and I always try to translate that because in Dutch we can play with the word. So wijkwaarden, wijkwaren, so it means the house of good and values. And this was a test directory to look if there was enough you would say, interest by everybody, enough interest, enough willingness of people to actually start thinking and working on what this kind of neighborhood organization that is an urban union that's based on the scale of a neighborhood could look like. And I have to tell you, it's been a very, very steep learning curve. Because we had to learn about different organizational forms, we had to create a common understanding of what kind of organizational form would hold both social as well as politically. And we had to do that across race, gender, class, and level of education. And I think that's also something to take into account if we talk about participatory design. How can we do that as a collective learning across race, class, gender, but also across educational level? And I think that's where we sometimes also are not very good at our job, myself included. And that's a process, you could say, that's full of conflicts. Because you have to learn how to deal with our differences. And I think this is very important. It's conflictuous, but it also has to in somewhere lead to some form of union that makes us to be able to operate on the ground together as well. And I want to quote Farida here because she's a member of our cooperative who in an interview with a PhD student actually gave a very interesting quote about this process, and I just want to give it to you because quite often people also said, but you are speaking here, I'm speaking here, she's not speaking here. Predominantly this has to do with the English, I have to say. But it's also that people do understand these processes in a certain way. It's also finding out how we can understand them collectively. So she said, and I quote her literally now, "This process goes deeper than the surface of this space. This process can't be seen with the naked eye. It's passed on to all the people who came here, without mentioning it and without people realizing what this place was doing to them. It secretly painted something in the heads of these men and women, making them see the other with different eyes. And that's definitely an art, and a very beautiful one. If you sit here every day, you can see it happening though. And I can see it for certain, and I'm very hopeful because of that." So, thank you very much, Farida, I always say. So, beginning 2014, Freehouse made the decision to hand over the chain of collective production to a formalized wijk or neighborhood cooperative, a cooperative on the scale of a neighborhood. The wijk cooperative is a self-organized and self-run body that continues the work of creating local, self-produced economic opportunities for the neighborhood, leveraging political power to shift policy and negotiate economic advantage, developing local skills and self-certification, and strengthening resilient intercultural networks, trying to create a radical form of self-governance in the area. And why does the wijk co-op wants to do that? I think what it wants to do is it wants to address the gaps in governmental thinking about the well-being of the residents of the Afrikanenwijk. And it adheres to a wider ranging set of values. These values primarily concern quantifying the capabilities of its residents rather than the tiresome logic of using economic indicators to measure social well-being. The indicators typically used by government include income, employment levels, home ownership, and dependency on social welfare. And although I really liked the speech before, that are the indicators that you see. And the question is, are there other ones? And how would they then look? And in providing an organizational infrastructure, the Wijk Co-op can offer an alternative to the extremely imposed forms of economic development by the government, ensuring that local economy reinvests in its own organic growth and its own inherent capability. And I think we are struggling with it on a daily basis at the moment. Because one of our main challenges is that what we want is to draw financial flows inwards and extract financial capital for social, intellectual and affective values. So to make sure that a lot of money and a lot of services that is actually in policy and program and design that's actually targeted at the area is not just by the same time managed by external organizations and party and even external designers, and hardly any of this money stays within the neighborhood. It directly flows out again. So how can we in some way or another, by knitting ourselves into a stronger collective, make sure that we can redistribute that money on a local level so that we together can become strong with that. And I think the effort of the co-op hinges on the emergence of trusting relationships within the neighborhoods, and this is a very difficult one. And that these networks produce sustainable mutual support structures in the form of physical spaces, services, and an economic fund that residents can turn to in times of duress. Therefore, an overarching measure of the neighborhood's resilience serves to provide evidence for its effective self-organization, the promotion of equity and the distribution of scarcity and the leverages in the realm of policy. And if you remember that first empty sort of square, that I think for the government is a starting point to think about the new Afrikanenwijk. I think for us this is the same square, but we see it like that. We see it as not only a set of invisible designs that we try to revel, but also a set of capabilities and of capacities that are actually residing in the area, that have the seeds for the resilience of the area. So how can we nurture them and how can we grow them? And I think I have two things to end here with. I think one is what Lorenzo Mondada says when he talks about what it means to become collective. Because as you say that Harvard says, it's all depending, this right to the city and the fact that we can actually together design the places we live and become actors in our own surrounding that are capable to take matters into our own hands. This has to be a collective power. So how do then become collective? I think this is a very important thing. And he says, which I like very much, the logic of public action, of individuals becoming a collective in the course of their local emergent coordinates, raises issues not only related to questions of the voicing of a group, often being spoken to more than speaking themselves, but more fundamentally to question of what makes collective action possible, of how the group in the making is accomplished through public action. Thinking of collective not as pre-existing social structures, but as actively becoming in context. And this is a way of interrogating the very conditions of politics. In this sense, political matters are not restricted to the official public scene, but concerns of everyday life, as it unfolds through the continuous ongoing constitution and dissolution of social aggregates. And I think that's a very, very beautiful way to say it. So it's this like becoming in condition, in context, as a matter of everyday life, that we have to actually do together. And then when Sue Bell-Yanks, and I quoted some of her writing, sort of been looking at this process of handing over from the co-op, from Freehouse to the co-op, and talking about this process of becoming collective, what we're trying to do, and also trying to leverage, finding a way to leverage ourselves politically, she says that actually in this whole building of trust relationships, which not always goes that well, I am very honest about it, is that the co-op's main challenge is to be exceedingly aware of how it changes and why. It must always be questioning what agendas are driving it forward and whether it's living up to its values. And because it's self-produced, the vast diversity of cultures, educational level, economic classes and individual agendas it encompasses must also be self-critical and reflective. The kind of culture, the culture of a neighborhood that is organized through cooperative methods can only be built through millions of conversations, millions of interactions, crossing paths and working together a millions of times. It's an intricate dance with no end. The prospect of a self-organization that can be focused and reliable, flexible and expansive. And every time I read that, I think it's almost an impossibility. But it is this impossibility, I think, that we have to start designing conditions for. So how can we have millions of conversations, hold millions of gatherings, and do that over and over and over and over again? And that this practice of design is not only challenging, not only building already existing given policies, but it's a practice of trying to hold the space, or to create a space that can hold these millions of conversations in order to allow people to actually be a collective power to take over the forces of urbanization. And I show you this image. This was our first general meeting from our neighborhood cooperative, very formal one. It's also the reason why I'm leaving earlier today, because we're having our third one tonight. And we decided to make it a little bit more informal meeting, to start in little groups to talk about all the things and all the desires that are there on the table, and how we as a group can start working at that, or can start designing at that. So that's where I want to leave you when it comes to de Afrikaanse Wijk Coop.